It's Tuesday, it's 8 o'clock, and this is The Issue here on your TV. I'm Mark Carr, and I'm your host this evening, and my co-host, Rick Goldring, former mayor of the city of Burlington. And I didn't know whether you wanted me to add anything else to that introduction.
That's good. Rick Goldring, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, and I'll turn it over to you, Rick, and let you introduce our guest.
Sure. So thanks, Mark, for the opportunity to co-host the odd episode with you. I'm pleased to be here tonight. Our guest this evening is Suzanne Mamel, who's the Executive Director of the Hamilton Halton Home Builders Association. And it says on your website, Suzanne, that you are the voice of the residential construction and renovation industry.
Yes.
So my question is, who do you speak to?
We speak to a variety of different people, and it depends on the situation. Sometimes we're speaking to our members, sometimes we're speaking to politicians, sometimes we're speaking to the public. And in fact, in the next 6 months or so, you'll see us speaking to the public more, because I think there's a need for education and information. The housing market has changed so much in the last couple of decades, and it's a huge issue. It's obviously one of the top issues in the election, but it's always an issue when people talk about it. They talk about affordability and they talk about choice, and that is really what we do. We advocate for choice and affordability in those markets. The new home market isn't really an official market. They come together when they're looking for a new home, but they don't necessarily look at the impact, so they're not in it long term. So an organization like ours looks at how regulations and policies affect their ability to buy what they're looking for or in a price range they are. We're not there saying the price of the house is too much and you should pay $10,000 less. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how regulation and policy impacts the price of those houses, because they're not really in a position to affect them.
So, Suzanne, it sounds to me like you're really talking for the developers.
Well, certainly it is developers who are parts of our association, but it's not just developers. Our association has bankers and insurance companies and architects and engineers, and we represent them and their ability to do business. I think one of the things that happens is the new home construction market is a massive market in terms of jobs and numbers of millions of dollars it generates for the economy. So you're speaking for all of these people, and that's why I said it depends on the day, it depends on the conversation, because you could be talking about making sure that that industry flourishes in the economy, because there's so many people who rely on it for their living. But all of those things then come together. If the housing market isn't strong, the prices of houses go up. Hopefully we'll talk shortly about a lack of supply when it comes to housing and its effect on the market. But it's a big juggernaut. People look at the housing market as something that's simple, and that it should just, why is it so expensive? It should be cheaper. But they don't realize the intricacies of it.
So we know it's not simple.
Yes.
It's not a simple issue at all. It's a very complex issue and many different considerations to deal with.
Yeah.
But you look at Oakville, $1.3 million, $1.5 million is the midpoint for a single family home in the town of Oakville. Burlington's about $1 million.
Yeah.
So those are pretty hefty prices. We know that low interest rates have contributed to that.
Yeah.
What are some of the other factors that have contributed to the cost of housing, and what can your sector do about it?
So one of the things that's interesting to note is that, so we do an economic impact sheet for both Hamilton and Burlington every year. And the one that we did earlier this year, it looked at the price of housing increases relative to income. And between 2005 and 2015, incomes went up by 5.5%, the average income, over 10 years. So incomes aren't keeping pace with inflation. Never mind the price of houses, because between 2005 and 2018, the price of a house in Burlington increased by 286%. So you look at why that is, and what can our association do to minimize the price of houses? We can do exactly what we're doing. We talk to governments and say, why is this? So for example, HST was put on the price of a new house in the 80s. and it was done on the basis that a very expensive home, which at that point was, I think actually it was the 90s, $400,000 and up. On any price of the house, you'd charge HST. And the government was going to index that. It's never been indexed. So now every person, you don't buy a house for under $400,000. Everybody pays that. So that contributes to the price of the house. There are so many
development charges.
Development charges, sure.
There's a long list of
there's a long list of fees and
factors.
things like that. Development charges are needed, and the development charges, although the province is looking at changing how development charges are collected into a new fee, they're still needed because they provide money for the services to support that housing population. In Burlington last year, I think they were just over $43,000 per single family home.
Including Halton and the city of Burlington.
Yes.
Yeah. And with regard to development charges, with regard to all the different charges, what's your position? If you could change anything that would help with the supply of housing, to help housing be more affordable, what would it be? What would you ask the municipal government or the provincial government to act on?
One would be something that the province is currently attempting to do, and that would be cutting red tape. Time is money, and so a current project, I used to be a development consultant, and when I started, we would tell people 6 to 12 months to get a project off the line. When I left, it was 3 to 4 years. That was 5 years ago. If somebody came to me now, I would say 10 years. That's 10 years to get from I'm buying this piece of land to I'm putting up a building. That's a lot of time, and it's a lot of money. So when you're carrying those money, it adds to the price of the house.
But those regulations are built in to protect people, are they not?
Oh, lots of them are, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm not suggesting.
And so we don't want to cut the red tape that is there to protect people.
I'm not suggesting that we go to the wild, wild west. Okay. I'm not suggesting that at all.
They need to expedite the process.
They need to expedite the process, that's right. And so there are things that can be done to do that. But currently, the way that the process works is it takes that long to get a project to market. So it affects a couple of things. It affects the price, but it actually affects the supply, because you can imagine if this is somebody's business, if they were able to turn that project over in 5 years, well, they do 2 projects in the 10 years because that's their business. But people have a finite amount of funds, and it takes a lot of money to get these projects off the ground. So you can imagine if you were doing let's say you were doing a 150 unit building and it took you 10 years, well, 5 years later you may start the next so that you're building one after the other. But if you could do it faster, you'd have another 150 units every 10 years. But
doesn't the market set the price? It isn't so much the fixed costs of the development. Doesn't the market set the price? And so if you're able to expedite the process and you're able to eliminate some costs, that the cost of the unit is going to go down. But if the developer can get $1 million a unit or $800,000 a unit, isn't the market that really is the number one determining factor of a price?
So if the market is unwilling to pay that, and really when housing becomes a national level issue, and the reality is housing affordability isn't even a national issue, it's an international issue. So if anybody thinks that what's happening in Burlington isn't happening anywhere else, they're naive.
Well, I think some of the things that are happening in Burlington are unique.
Yes, fair enough. But I'm just talking about housing affordability. Okay. It may be exacerbated, but housing affordability is an actual international issue. It's not just Toronto. It's not Vancouver. It's, when CMHC does studies, they talk about Toronto, Vancouver, and Hamilton, oddly enough, in terms of markets that are highly valued. Highly priced. I'm not going to say valued is misconstrued sometimes. So, it's Burlington is there, and it's unique in some ways, but it's not unique in others. And I think that to look at the development sector and say, well, what can you do about it? If the market truly can't afford it, and they're saying it's too expensive, then they say that's more money than it's worth. That's That's economics,
And
and
then people
that's
don't
how.
buy, is what
and
you're
people
saying.
don't buy.
Right.
But the reality is, the issue here is that there isn't enough supply, and we have 2.6 million new people coming to Ontario in the future, and that is a million new homes, and are needed for those people. 1 million new homes. So you think about that, like it's massive.
How many were built last year?
In Burlington, so far this year, 418 new housing unit permits have been put
In 2019.
2019 to date. So that which is underneath the average that the city needs to be in to hit the regional targets from 2015 to 2031. The average, it was 8,300 units they were to build, so it's 521 a year. And the city of Burlington has been low on that. I mean, there's some other issues there. I mean, a lot of people speak to one statistic, which is we've exceeded our population target. We're good. And I was one of the first.
Well, we all know that is a minimum target. It is not a maximum target.
No, it's a minimum target, but it's also only one target.
Right.
It's not you achieve your population and you're good.
Right.
So you have to look into why that population target is what it is. And the reality is that we all know, you have the orchards go up, and then you have Alton Village, and the term I use is we blew through our green field. That's a Suzanne Mamel phrase. But
well, there was an insatiable demand, and so the houses were built and they were sold.
Yes.
And then we're out of greenfield.
Yes.
So now there's a different focus.
Well, there should be a different focus.
Absolutely.
But the problem is that people perceive that low-rise housing is the right choice for Burlington. The problem is there's no space to build it anymore. But you still have people to house, you still have people coming to the city, and so where are they going to live?
Well, what new types of housing are you suggesting rather than the single-family home?
And what about rentals, too?
It doesn't matter.
And rentals,
so when I talk about housing, I'm not talking about purchasing. It's a housing unit. It may be a single-family house. It could be a basement apartment that somebody's chosen to give to another family. It's about intensifying. So things like basement apartments, units over garages, that's what we call gentle density. And what it does is it allows for people to move into neighborhoods. A lot of neighborhoods, they're aging, and the number of people in those homes is lower and lower. So how do you, I grew up a family of four in a house that was about 1,200 square feet.
Me too.
You just don't, and there were a lot of families that were 6 people, 7 people in those homes. You just don't see that now. And so you have to look back and say, what is it that we need? What do we require? I think when I go to other countries and I look at how they, with the exception of the United States, they live a very different way. When you go to a lot of European cities, they live in a more walkable way, but they're not all living in single-family houses with their own yards and their own pools. They're living in a very dense, a far denser form. They walk more, they bike more. The whole way of living changes. So it's a very different approach. It's one that I personally love, and I think a lot of people do. People who are choosing to live downtown, whether it be Burlington or Oakville, they're choosing it for a lifestyle, primarily, maybe choosing it for price, maybe choosing because that's the only thing where it's being built. Mm-hmm. But people for a downtown is critical. It's critical for those businesses to survive. It's like I think about downtown Burlington.
Well, you get that activity 24/7 as opposed to 9 to 5, 5 days a week.
Yeah, if you walk down Brant Street at 10 o'clock at night, it's a ghost town.
It's pretty quiet. Yeah.
It's pretty quiet. I live a block away, and it's very, very quiet. So then, how do you take that downtown and provide it, with the exception of a festival downtown in the summer, which then it booms? How do you bring it to life?
But the challenge is that so many people have purchased their homes in and around the downtown based on the current state, whatever it was.
Yes.
Whatever that current state was when they bought their home.
Yes.
And obviously the downtown is evolving
Yes.
In a very different way than what many people would have thought or expected.
Yes.
And that's the issue. So how can you help? How can you help with that discussion of helping it be a win-win? The new development, whether it be Burlington or wherever, but if it's in downtown Burlington, it can be a win-win for existing residents as well as new residents. How can you bring those two together?
So I mentioned earlier we're going to be doing a bit of an education piece over the next 6 months or so. And I think a lot of it is education. It's about the evolution of cities. It's about how a city changes, because all cities change. All cities evolve at different paces, depending on where they are in the world.
With different neighborhoods
and different needs. Downtown Burlington is an urban growth center. And that suggests that it is...
Sorry, is there any way that genie can be put back in the bottle? Because I know some people would love to see that genie go back in the bottle, that to take that urban growth center designation away from downtown Burlington. It's my view that the genie's out of the bottle, and there's no way that the province of Ontario or the development industry would allow anybody to get rid of that urban growth center designation. It was made in 2006. Burlington City Council at the time supported it, as well as the province, which was a clear signal to the development community that we're open for business.
Correct.
And we want assembly of properties, we want new development. Is there any reasonable way that urban growth center designation can be removed from the downtown?
I'll be honest, I don't know why people would want it to. I'll be frank. That's my position. Why wouldn't you want to thrive in downtown?
People would want to
okay,
get
so
rid of it.
but let me finish.
Limit the type of development.
Let me finish. Yes, limit the type of development. But if what you get is all four-story development or single-family homes or townhouses,
maybe you wouldn't get any though.
You wouldn't get any because the price of land can't support it.
Right.
So there's that. The price of land can't support it. But if you do, the price of the units you get are way above the average. And then you can't speak about affordability. Yes, you're giving a product that people are saying, yeah, I love the way that looks. But if nobody can afford to live there except the ultra-rich, what kind of city are we building? We're building an elitist city, and that is not really, that's not the Burlington I want to live in. That's not the Burlington I think a lot of people. So you have to take that thought and say, I don't want the city to change. Well, then you say, okay, the city's not going to change. How do you deal with municipal finances? There's all of these things that come into play, and people have to understand why. So this is what we're doing, is we're going to go out and explain the why houses are, and we're also going to go out and explain the finances of a project to say this is why they're so expensive. This is, the 20 to 25% of the price of a new home that's tax or fees. This is why it is that way. I'm not suggesting that that's wrong, but people just need the information.
Well, good luck doing that.
Yeah.
Because you can't, in my humble opinion, you can't change the perception of a great number of people by just going out and giving them more information.
No, but you can provide accurate facts that when they are questioning the why, you have a reasonable expectation. It's not just because I want to do it. It's because this is how the financing of a project works. For example, I was walking by a site that's under construction last week, and these two women were standing there, and they're like, I said, do you see anything interesting? And they said, no, but this isn't what we ordered. And I want to understand a place where residents feel that it's their right to design a new building, that it's their right to say what happens on a piece of property when they neither own it nor are they going to use it. Now, I do get to a point why they do, because it's their city and it's because it's something they're going to look at. But they chose the house they live in, they chose the look of it, they chose the paint. They didn't have to ask their neighbors when they choose what tree they plant on their front yard. I don't think they go out and ask people within 100 meters if they're happy with that tree. And so I think there's also a point that, yes, the community has a say, but only to a point, because it's not what they do. Nobody tells them how to teach. Nobody tells them how to design.
Isn't that diversity of design a good thing for a town or a city?
Oh, absolutely.
So it doesn't all look the same like a lot of cities further east of us, like Mississauga. A couple of areas in Mississauga look like they have been designed by one person.
Yeah.
And I think that diversity of design is a real a tribute to
So the city has an urban
Burlington.
design panel, I forget what they call it,
Yep.
an urban design panel to
Yep.
give input on new development.
BUD.
Beg pardon?
BUD.
The BUD, okay, Berlin Urban Design Panel, whatever they call it, BUD, to give input. Is that a good strategy? Is that a good approach to get some input from some
Absolutely.
people who are involved broadly in the sector?
Absolutely. I think it's a good. We did have quite a few comments on the implementation of the BUD panel. It wasn't, though, about the philosophy as if an urban design review is warranted or not. I think it's a very good thing. But a lot of municipalities, Mississauga, Burlington included, also have guidelines on how you build. And by the time you implement those guidelines, you do sort of, just to an extent, and not the whole thing, you do cookie cutter some of the buildings because the heights of the first floors, they're set, the streetscape, the street frontage, they want sort of uniform look and residential. So by the time you incorporate all of the requirements of a project, you are limited. Your design is limited. You know, at this floor you step back, at this height you got to be this far away. So it becomes this math. It becomes more of a math function than it does a design function, and the design comes later, which is an unfortunate outcome of it. But you know, there is that kind of a thing happening because some of the uniqueness that, and you and I had a discussion about unique spaces, and if somebody wanted a loft space that was double height, but the problem is that when projects are being built, typically retail office end users aren't known. So now you're building for the average or the commonality because you don't know who's going to want the space.
It doesn't look like very unique space often when these new buildings are finished because there's nobody in there yet.
Yes.
And you know, one of the things that's attractive to a number of people about downtown Burlington, not just downtown Burlington, I would say other downtowns, is that the diversity and variety of the type of retail and the type of look of the retail in a downtown. And the concern is when you have new development that it all looks the same. But you're just saying, though, you're somewhat straitjacketed as to the type of retail that you're creating at the ground level of some of these buildings because of the city, but also because of the fact you don't have renters yet for the space. So you have to make it as broadly appealing to everybody as you can in order to make it work financially.
Absolutely, and you know the thing is that retail along Brant Street itself is fairly flourishing, but we have seen spaces, and not just as a result of development of people leaving and going elsewhere, but once you get off Brant Street, it's tough. So for example, the new Berkeley building, they can't get renters for the.
Okay, and the Berkeley building is
it's 1 block away from.
It's one
Brant
block
Street?
away from Brant Street.
Okay.
It's probably the newest opened high rise, which is why I would give it as an example. The owners told me they can't rent out the retail space, so they're trying to considering going back to the city to change it to office space. Which, you know, if I was, and this is just now my personal opinion, I would love to see more offices downtown because that then supports the businesses and everything. But
when you say Brant Street is flourishing, there are single-family homes originally that are turned into offices, and that is not the highest use of that land.
No, and you'll never get a city that always has the highest and best use. The reality is highest and best use is a way to look at a new development application for how it adds or detracts to a city. but that's like talking about build out. When we were looking at the original Burlington official plan, there's a lot of discussion about build out. Well, what is build out? And this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about evolution of a city. There's no build out. Like, a city doesn't just stop. It's always changing.
Cities are never full.
Cities are never
full.
Cities are never full. So it's hard to have a discussion about build out, what a city would look like. Yet that's a process that people, they want. They want to say, well, what would this look like if it was all built out? And no, the reality is no two people are ever going to see it the same way. And no two people consider the same thing. So a building that somebody's used and they've turned it into a dentist office or a legal office or whatever the case may be, it's not the highest and best use, but it's still needed. And it is what provides that variety that Rick was talking about.
I guess when we look at the provincial direction, and this is not just this government, but the previous government more
Absolutely.
so, because they were in power much longer, but they came up with the Places to Grow plan in tandem with the Greenbelt plan.
Yep.
And those two pieces of legislation are really governing how we evolve.
Absolutely.
As a region and as a city and as a region and a broader region being the Greater Golden Horseshoe.
Yeah.
And in so many areas of that plan, there's urban growth centers all over the place. And they've been designated to have much more intensity of use with more jobs and more people living there. And it's going to continue. And that's just all there is to it. There's a limit of land space. So I've always said this when I was mayor, we can't stop it. We have to shape it and we have to form it
Absolutely.
to make sure we get what we want. We're not going to be able to say no to it, but we have to do our best to shape it and form it. So shaping and forming it, I'm looking at the Dillon report, which is produced in June,
Yes.
Stating that there could be upwards, or there will be upwards of 2,900 units coming to the Urban Growth Center in downtown Burlington. We're almost out of time.
And we're almost out of time. We're almost out of time.
We're getting rolling here. We're just getting rolling.
I know, Rick. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. And Suzanne, I appreciate you coming in and explaining some of the issues that we all have questions about and some difficulties with at this juncture in our in the evolution of our city and town. So, and Rick, thank you very much for suggesting to bring the Hamilton Halton Home Builders Association in today. Very, very enlightening, and I knew we'd get to politics somewhere along the line. I want to remind our viewers that you'll be joining me and Deb Timstra on the election coverage.
Yeah, we look forward to that.
Yeah.
I understand the polls don't close at 9:30. That means we're not on until 9:30. Which means it could be on until midnight that night, but it'll be fun. Elections are always fun. Well, not all of them, but
not all of them. But it'll be interesting because the polls are saying very, very close race. So we'll have to see. To our viewers, thanks a lot for watching. I'm Mark Carr for The Issue here on your TV. Truly local television.